What we're interested in here is the future, and particularly thinking about it from a perspective of where we sit. What is the future of our public lands? I will be moderating, but let me introduce, let me introduce each of the panelists. So we have Evan Blevins, who is with the Pacific Legal Foundation. We have Steve Bloch with the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance. Jamie Harvey, who's a county commissioner, District 3 in San Juan County, enrolled member of Navajo Nation, and Utah Navajo Trust Fund, Dene Advisory Committee member. We have Sally Jewell, who I introduced earlier, so I'll keep it short here, but U.S. Secretary of the Interior, 2013 to 17, and accomplished entrepreneur. We have Redge Johnson, Executive Director of the Governor's Public Land Policy Coordinating Office, PLPCO. All right. Maybe I could just give each of our panelists, let's call it 2 to 5 minutes, where we can, I just really want you to just start out here by just giving us a little overview about your kind of general approach to this kind of the big question: what is the future? What are the major themes we should think of? Any of those, you could take this from whatever tack you want, but I'm going to give you 3 to 5 minutes, and then I've got some detailed questions. I've got them on my laptop that's charging in the corner, so I'm going to run and get it right this second. I'll be right back, but why don't you all start? And when we just, would you mind if you started, Jamie, we'll kind of march our way down? Is that okay?
Green means go, right? So, well, real quick introduction. I think that's really what we're doing, right? Sure. Yate. That means hello, or all is well in Navajo. That's who I am. I'm Dene. I'm from San Juan County, and I'm originally from Montezuma Creek, Utah. Any natives in here besides Davina Smith?
Back corner.
Yate. You know, it's important, I think, as I bring in the spirit of being native, this statement for natives is important to always say. We've always been here. We've always been and will always be. And so that's always important to remember, is that we've always been here. And so I think that's part of my message, is honoring us and who we are. The second piece is, I come from an area where in San Juan County, here are some things we have. Lisbon copper mine, Energy Fuels, just like near me, Resolute Natural Resources Oil Company, Navajo Nation Oil and Gas, Running Horse Pipeline, and then you got Navajo Utility Authority solar projects out in Red Mesa. That's in our community right now. I think for the most part, tribal voice, tribal input, that's the huge piece. Allowing tribes an opportunity to have space, just as I'm here being honored with the opportunity to share and to bring a perspective from our culture and our traditions. So I think if you can manage that moving forward in any energy development project, and you create that partnership, that's huge. Redge Johnson, or Redge down there. I don't know why we ended up so far apart. But I really value his support and all the work he's done with our county, with our tribe. That's the beginning of making things work and making sure that tribes, they have a voice and they're aware. I'm kind of like I go into meetings where everything's in a different language, in the English language. Then when you go home, I have to explain it in my own language. Go home, and so that's another perspective too. We have to do that extra work to be clear, to have transparency. I'll leave my comments at that because I can really get long-winded. But
there we go. Well, thank you for having us here today, Brig. I really appreciate it. I'm Steve Bloch. I'm the legal director of the Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance here in Salt Lake City. It's nice to see Bob Kiter and to have somewhat of a full circle. I was with Bob at the first Stegner Center in 1996 as a law student, and it's nice to continue the circle. I'm an optimist. I appreciate the chance to follow on the heels of some of the comments from Ryan. I'm an optimist, I think, because, frankly, the work that we do at SUA, right, that's the acronym for Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, means that every day we have to show up to work hoping that things are going to be better and working to achieve that outcome. A slice of that is working to uplift Native voices, if it's from San Juan County or from throughout the state or throughout the region, because of course our modern day states and the tribal nations and reservations don't reflect the reality of where those nations have been for time immemorial. These are tough times to be an optimist. So many of the things we've heard throughout the conference make me really concerned. I'm just going to tick off a few of the things and sort of the themes of things that are like front of our work or front of our mind. And they're not going to be surprising. They're things we've heard throughout the conference. If it's the defunding of the federal government and of the federal land management agencies who we all count on to provide these services to the public and to the land. And that then partners up with the sell-off of lands. And we've heard a lot about Senator Mike Lee's effort from this past summer. We shouldn't forget that Representative Celeste Malloy was another, she played a large role in that as well, and they were both defeated. The unlikely happening in that event of having Lee and Malloy unify the nation so well with this sort of rising up of knowing that the love of federal land, the love of wide open spaces, the love of our public commons isn't something that's defined by party or by so many of the things that slice up our society. It was this real unifying moment, and I found some sort of deep irony in that would be the outcome. But the state of Utah is very complicit in that as well. This wasn't Lee and Malloy acting alone. This was Lee and Malloy acting on behalf of so many of the very loud, outspoken voices who run the state of Utah. And that's another slice of things that we spend a lot of time on. And then the climate crisis. It's 80 degrees here in Salt Lake City on a March afternoon. Woke up to find my neighbors had run their sprinklers last night for the first time this year, which is great. It so impacts everything that we're all going to be doing. I mean, every day of the rest of this year, every day of the rest of our lives, we're going to be involved in this, and hotter and drier and more unpredictable, and what that's going to mean for the public lands in our state, and how do we conserve and manage and protect them while still fulfilling these uses that Congress for the moment has established of multiple use and sustained yield, and that they're going to be open to a variety of uses. And that's, I think that's a pretty large task. I'll hand it over to Sally.
I think you've heard enough from me. I'll say a few words only. The future of public lands are in our hands. I've been working really hard lately, and I just hit the wall on Sunday and said to my husband, I need nature. I need to get outside. We'd had snow on Saturday, which is kind of crazy, and now we got an atmospheric river of, the Pineapple Express coming up from Hawaii that's melting on that rain and putting it into our rivers instead of our snowpack. Excuse me. But so we went out on the trail. It was snowy. And besides getting a dose of nature, I'd say one of the things that I took great heart in, it was absolutely full of people. It was full mostly of people wearing sneakers, and it was very slippery. I had boots and micro spikes on and 2 trekking poles, and so did my husband, and we were doing fine, but I was just worried about others falling into the river. But people woke up, and I think the pandemic was a huge part of this, about how we need nature, how nature nurtures us. This is not something we have to explain to Jamie. I think indigenous communities have been connected to the land, and they don't consider themselves to be above the rocks and the trees and the animals. They're not superior, they are a part of, and I think the rest of us are waking up to that. And that gives me some hope. I also found, whether it was, the very controversial and difficult work on Bears Ears National Monument, and within your community, Jamie, people were split, and I listened to both sides and went to the San Juan County, listened to the commissioners, had a separate meeting with a group that said they were Blue Mountain Dene, took a different perspective. Listening and getting to know people as individuals is critically important if we're going to make progress, and that is really, really important on the future of public lands. And I do think in this polarized environment, people are coming across as more strident than they are in their hearts. And when you meet with people one-on-one and you talk with them, you find common ground. Again, the name of John Leshy's book, but it is about respect, and it's about time, and it's about human relationships that really moves this forward. And I think at the end of the day, public lands will be okay, but we would be far more efficient if we took care of them consistently and didn't run the risk of undermining those who care for them today. And I think that's also going to be really important to what our job is going to look like with public lands in the future. Thanks.
My name is Ethan Blevins. I'm a senior legal fellow at Pacific Legal Foundation. Very excited and grateful to be here. So Pacific Legal Foundation is a nonprofit public interest law firm that litigates across the country to promote and protect individual rights. And when it comes to public lands, we want to free individuals and businesses to unlock the abundance on those lands, and we want to restore the separation of powers that ensures that public lands, and with respect to really any management of our lands, that it's according to the consent of the governed. So I study the Constitution for a living, so I look at public lands through the lens of our founding documents, and I think as we look to the future, it is important to look to the past, to the very first document that founded us, which was the Declaration of Independence. And there's an iconic line in there that I think is very pertinent to how we look to the future of public lands, where Thomas Jefferson wrote that legitimate government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. And in my view, as a student of the Constitution, management of public lands has drifted from that ideal along basically 2 fronts. One is the concentration of power in the federal government. So I think we've lost some of the federalism that ensures consent of the governed, ensures that the people who live in and around and work around these lands have consent over how the lands are governed. And secondly, we want to see a stronger, more robust role for Congress and how our public lands are managed to ensure the consent of the governed. And in this case, the governed include all of us. They include Pacific Legal Foundation client Viking Lumber that has harvested old growth timber in the Tungus National Forest for decades, a small multi-generational family business that lost the ability to harvest that timber when guidance adopted by the National Forest Service forbade that. And now the business is on the brink of destruction. The governed, whose consent we should consider, include Utah ranchers who live and work around these lands and face the regulatory ping pong we've talked a lot about when every 4 to 8 years a new executive comes into power and shrinks monuments or expands monuments, adopts a new resource management plan, and the rules on the ground are constantly changing. I think one way to change that problem is to put more power back in the hands of Congress. And of course, the governed also include all of us and Utahns who are seeing prices of the pump go up and might care about whether we, for example, use the Uinta Basin to attempt to lower those prices and make life more affordable for the governed. So ultimately, the consent of the governed should be the ruling idea, I think, behind our public lands. The Constitution's all about making the decision about who decides, right? And that's an important part of this conversation. Who makes the ultimate decisions? And I think the answer is to put more power back in the hands of Congress and local constituents.
Thank you. Great to be here with you this afternoon. I'm glad not all of you left after this or after the last session. You stuck around to listen to us. Redge Johnson, Director of Utah's Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office. Our task is to try to manage multiple use on public lands and protect access to public lands. To start with, if I could, I'd like to just give you a little personal history. 6th generation Utahn. My ancestors pulled handcarts across the country in order to get here. So Jamie's got mine beat by many, many generations, but I'm really proud of the ancestors that took that leap of faith to come here. Our family has loved this place ever since. We've been here ever since. We've been in agriculture, mining, timber, you name it, and that's kind of where my background started. I was riding through the forest one time with my grandfather, and this was 50 years ago, and he started cussing Smokey the Bear. And I'm a little kid thinking, holy cow, Grandpa's lost it. What's he cussing Smokey the Bear for? Well, that was my first lesson in forest management and what has happened when we started putting out fires in a fire-dependent ecosystem. And he talked to me for 2 hours that day about the impacts of fire and what good fire was and what bad fire was, and how we were just starting with some of the implementation of no logging, protecting certain resources because of logging. And he says there has to be a balance in nature. And that is a lesson that I took to heart, and it's something that I've tried to do from then on, is figure out where that balance is. And I can tell you, I know the state of Utah took a whole lot of arrows yesterday and quite a few today. We're thick-skinned, we can take it. When I go and talk to the Energy Summit, we take a lot of arrows there because we're not doing enough. When I go and talk to the grazing community, we take a lot of arrows there because we're not doing enough. Remember, public lands are public lands. They're for everybody, and there are uses out there for everybody. They're not just about locking up and throwing away the key and seeing museum management. We do have parks for that. They're lovely. We fully support that. There are areas that are absolutely beautiful, and we support protecting those as well. But this building, this was built with steel and cement and wood. Those all came from public lands or from private lands, but natural resources. So we have to have that balance. If we want to have these types of things and these types of things, natural resources has to be part of the equation. It just has to be, whether that's on public lands or private lands. The art is figuring out how to do that wisely. And I love working with Commissioner Harvey, the state legislators, the governor, our senators, yes, even Senator Lee. And when we get to that question, I'm really happy to dive into that, because there's another part of that story that you all aren't hearing. and I'm anxious to be able to share that with you. So yeah, I love the work that we get to do. I love public lands. Some of you may love public lands as much as I do, but I guarantee nobody loves public lands more than I do. I grew up on public lands, spent a good portion of my childhood living without running water, electricity, or telephone. My playground, my Xbox, if you will, was going out and spending time in nature, and that's how I grew up. So I bring a little different perspective to my work. I think that's what the governor appreciates about me, is I bring a common sense perspective. But I also recognize that we have to have that balance, and conservation is absolutely part of that balance. But having this building, having our phones, that's the other part of that balance, and that's my job, is to make that happen. And it's a hell of a tough job, but I love it. Thanks.
Okay, so I don't know if we agree on so much. I don't know if we have anything to talk about. One thing I'll just add about Smokey, that there's a lot of reasons to have resentment, but the thing for me that has really got me is just so much pressure. It's only you. Come on, can I get a little help here? Let's talk a little bit about. Let's talk about some of the challenges. Let's talk about some of the opportunities, and what I'd like to kind of emphasize as we go through, I'm trying to find, as John Leshy's title, common ground here. If we can identify areas where we think we have some agreement, I think that might be a helpful step forward. But so some of this has been already it's already out there. I'm sure some of you already want to respond to some of the things you've already heard. We could just do, I'll let the panelists decide who wants to jump in first. What are some of the opportunities? What are some of the challenges? And one other thing to say to the panelists, if you don't feel like hopping in on one of these, it's fine. We've got others. So, if you don't feel pressured if for whatever reason you don't want to engage with it, or you don't see something you want to say, it's no judgment. So opportunities, challenges. Who wants to take a shot?
I'll start with a challenge that I mentioned earlier, and I'll mention again. I think that, Redge mentioned this a little bit. Actually, we've heard a couple different renditions on the same thing, which is in both Forest Service lands and BLM lands, the mandate, in the case of BLM, it's FLPMA, Federal Public Lands Management Act, I think. It's around multiple use and sustained yield. And oftentimes we say multiple use, but we don't say the sustained yield part, but that's an important part of it, whether it's the Forest Service and forests and forest management, so that they'll be there long term, but they also provide a source of revenue, or it's grazing land, and Heidi talked about the importance of the Taylor Grazing Act and how without any of those constraints, the landscapes were really devastated by overgrazing, and that had long-term implications for some of these landscapes. But one of the things that I worry about right now is leasing on areas that haven't had the process to assess whether they are appropriate for that. There's a sacred site with the Blackfeet Nation. It's called Badger II Medicine. I don't know if you're familiar with this. I'm sure some people out here are, but it's between Glacier National Park and the Blackfeet Nation on Forest Service land. And it was leased by James Watt when he was Secretary of the Interior in the Reagan administration. He did a lot of leasing. Many of those leases have not gone anywhere, but Badger II Medicine it's a site that's very important to the tribe. I've been up there, and they have been trying at that time for over 30 years to get the leases relinquished. They'd never been used. And it took more than 30 years, multiple lawsuits, paying every dime back to every company that owned a lease to stop the development in that area, or to have the leases relinquished. I'm not sure they ever would have been developed. I mean, it's a bad use of everybody's time and money. And But valid existing rights are difficult. There are national parks in Florida that have oil and gas permits that predated the national parks. Those are valid existing rights. Those can be developed. Not easy to do from a public standpoint. But I do worry about right now, there's such a push to lease without any process that once those rights are out there, it's very difficult to get them back, even if they aren't actively used. And the cost for these leases is nothing. It's very, very low. So that's a challenge, and I just love to hear how others up here feel about what's been happening lately in terms of leasing. We did plenty of leasing, but we were really careful about where we did it, just as we did protections, and we were careful about where we did those too. Both appropriate uses for public lands. Thanks.
I think I would respond in a couple ways. I mean, one, right, we've all seen this administration decimate the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. There was a conference up here in November that talked about that. The fundamental precept of NEPA is to think first and then act, or to look before you leap. And that process should carry over to things like oil and gas leasing. And it doesn't in the Trump administration. That's just the bottom line. Because when you take out the processes that require these federal agencies to think first and then act, you end up with a lot of mistakes on the ground. And of course, I mean, Sally's question about new leasing is important, right? Because we know the Trump administration has this energy dominance agenda idea. But in a place like Utah, where we have and have had, for the past 30 plus years, more federal lands under lease than could ever be developed, new leasing is just not a priority. It's just not the way we should be spending our tax dollars, our time, the time that the federal land management agencies have to take to respond to lease nominations. And of course, it would be a whole separate conversation about how industry is free riding, how they don't have to pay for expressions of interest, and so they are moving those costs over to the over to the public, right? All of us have to pay for federal agencies to look at should leases be sold. I mean, I think the short answer is it's a challenge because it takes the time and energy that the few folks who are left at the Bureau of Land Management at the Utah State Office now have to spend time processing new lease nominations instead of actually working to manage the federal public lands.
Oh, thank you. So, a little different perspective on that from our side of the table, I guess. But it also, I think, illustrates one of my biggest concerns with public lands, is we end up in these camps, and we end up over here saying one thing, and it's valid. We say something over here, and it's also valid, but we don't get together and talk as much as we need to. Secretary Jewell, we don't have leases in the state of Utah that I'm aware of that are in areas that we don't have resources. Most of our companies, if they're leasing these lands, they're putting their money up, and to date, we have not seen that. So it's not an issue that I have dealt with. I think if we did, we'd want to see, the proper analysis done on those things. So point well taken, but we're just not seeing that here in the state of Utah yet. As far as NEPA goes, I think the 7-county infrastructure ruling had some good language in it that, it articulates that this is supposed to be an analysis. And yes, we should take a hard look at these, but it's not a substantive roadblock. And that's where we have ended up with a lot of these NEPA processes in the past, which is why the Transwest transmission line, which was taking renewable energy from Wyoming, passing it through Utah and going to California, took 17 years to get that project to start. If we're doing that kind of work for those kind of resources, why is it taking that long? And I absolutely support analysis, but we can't have analysis paralysis. And if you haven't heard that term, I'd ask you to look it up because it's real. And we have gotten into an era where we are building NEPA to withstand litigation, And it's just created a roadblock for a lot of good projects, which the fire panel earlier, I think they had a good discussion about that. So.
I'm just going to jump in, Ethan.
Sure, can I just, I'll have you respond after, if that's okay. I think there are probably a lot of people who would like to talk about that NEPA issue, and so maybe we can just hold on that for 1 second. Go ahead.
I was going to talk about a different challenge and opportunity, so if you...
please.
Okay.
And we'll come back to the NEPA. I just want to make sure we keep the trains moving.
Absolutely. Well, the thought that came to mind is the Congressional Review Act, because it is seen by different parties as a challenge and an opportunity, and it's certainly an up-and-coming issue because the Congressional Review Act, for those that don't know, gives Congress the authority to disapprove agency rules. Technically, rules have to be submitted to Congress. For years, a lot of them weren't. There's been a lot of debate about what is a rule and whether public land orders or specialty resource management plans count as a rule. So if it's a rule, then Congress has a window in which it can disapprove of it. This is, of course, front and center because there's one of these attempts to disapprove a rule right now with respect to the resource management plan with Grand Staircase. And in my mind, I'm one of the few fans of the Congressional Review Act. There are dozens of us. I used to work for one of the primary drafters of it, so I like it because it goes back to this consent of the governed idea. I want Congress to be in the driver's seat about major policy making in the United States, just generally. And I hope we can agree that land agencies make major policy. They're deciding big policy trade-offs about fundamental values. And so I think it's important that Congress has a say in that. Now, what I don't like is I don't like it being a post hoc process. That creates a lot of uncertainty, it creates a lot of unpredictability. I would rather Congress be at the front end of making the decisions, but since I can't have that yet, I will take the Congressional Review Act, which gives Congress a seat. Now, of course, congressional majorities change, so it might favor one party at one time, one party at the next. So we don't know what the Congressional Review Act will be used for when we have a different Congress. For right now, it's enough for me that I think the decision maker that should be in the driver's seat is inching his way into the driver's seat a little bit more, which is Congress. This means that if a rule is disapproved, it cannot be adopted in substantially similar manner, which is going to be a very heavily litigated issue about what is substantially similar or not. So this is a major upcoming issue for public lands. It's being used more. There's a big question about what kinds of rules with respect to public lands are even going to be subject to it at all. It's going to be working its way through the courts, and there's going to be a lot of bloodied fists and black eyes about this issue. Now I've given Stephen more to talk about.
And Steve, we'll go to these legal challenges next. Are any more on opportunities or challenges from the panelists?
We need an opportunity out here, so
okay.
I'm going to kick that out. You know, one of the things, and Redge, maybe particularly for you being with the state, is one of the things John Leshy mentioned, and this is a post-naming of Grand Staircase Escalante back in the Clinton administration, is they did a lands transfer. I mean, one of the things that maybe was well-intentioned but didn't work out so well is the checkerboarding of our landscapes. You know, when the railroads came out, you had private, state, and federal public lands. And so we've got these unfortunate, difficult areas to manage that are governed by, you know, sectional boundaries that really have nothing to do with ecosystems. And so while I was working on Bears Ears, I used a model from Grand Staircase, which is work with SITLA, to say, what are the areas that are important to you to develop? Where is the lithium? Where is the oil and gas? If you've got sections that are landlocked around, you know, inside federal public lands, how do we unlandlock those, and which sections do you want so that you can effectively develop those to fund the schools in Utah, which, like in my state of Washington, is the same thing. Oftentimes the state lands are used to fund public needs like schools. And then, enable us then, if the federal government has determined that a national monument or a national park is necessary, you have those and we'll take your lands and leave them within the national park. Will it be used for a different purpose? So I'd love to just get a perspective on the opportunity of working collaboratively across multiple land management landowners, federal, state, private, tribal, to say, how do we come together to manage these lands more effectively for all?
So, Secretary Jewell, thank you so much for the work on that, because that did put a lot of money into the school institutional trust lands bank, and they were able to help our schools with that those lands being transferred out. I do like to say to people in public lands, it's really damn complicated. That is a great opportunity. SITLA is still working on land trades to speak in order to help the school children here. There's a downside to that too, though. When we transferred all those out, we were working on a water project for the Grand Staircase, and it took us about 15 years to get it through, and that was to benefit both wildlife and our grazers. Conversely, over on Bears Ears, where we still have those SITLA parcels in there, we were able to do about 20 wells in 2 years, just because those holdings were still inside there, and it's a lot easier to do water projects for wildlife and for the grazing community on the SITLA parcels. So there's a balance there. I mean, if you're talking purely financial, yeah, trading those out of Bears Ears will definitely make sense. When you look at a culture like grazing, a value of wildlife for water projects, things like that, we just don't have to go through as much red tape. So that's the balancing act that we try to find and pursue.
Okay, so we've got a few things, but Commissioner, did you have something else to add on this question?
I think I just kind of want to mention in our perspective with natives, we have a kind of a different perspective when it comes to land. One of the things that is important for us, in my tribe, we recently had the tribe purchase Gouldings, and I know the forethought about that purchase is that it brings in more an opportunity for the tribe to establish a source of revenue and also to increase tourism. And I know that conversation among our elders and our community members is an important piece, because for us, there are spaces in our communities where they're sacred, I think. And I think my point I'm trying to get to is we welcome tourism. We want to participate in the opportunity to be good hosts and share the beauty of our land and our culture. But the issue there is the visitors. If there was a way to educate them about who we are, and something that goes along the lines of, we welcome you, we'd love for you to come and visit us, but understand we're natives and we have a different perspective with land, and if you can just honor our spaces and understand how we value certain places in our community, if you can just come with that respect and just come and appreciate and go home, that would be, I think, the big win for us. And that's something I think we really haven't had an opportunity to share or work on. But I know as time moves forward, that's going to be an important piece, I think, is helping those that are out there understand, look, you're coming into a community where there are Native Americans. They have homes there. They don't run around with feathers and teepees, but they're just like you and I, and they want to welcome you and just understand there are certain things that you need to have, a decorum maybe. Here's a silly example. We've got a lot of visitors that love to come to Forest Gump Hill, right? It's our main highway to Monument Valley. But the problem is, a lot of people taking pictures laying across the highway. And a lot of us are trying to get to our medical appointments. And some of us are late, but that's just a little example, There are other examples, like we have ruins that are sacred. If you want to visit those ruins, just know that that's important for us. And if you can respect that and understand that that's native architecture and it's past history prime. And we love that. So please respect it like we look at it, And if people can understand that, I think for us that's important. So it's just really, when we're getting ready for more volume of visitors, just having that education and asking for that respect. And it's also an opportunity for the tribe to work and work with the states and the tourism and focus on those kinds of themes. But that's what's going through my mind, Right now in our county, where we're trying to overhaul our energy, our county general plan. And in that general plan, we're trying to talk about, what are the energy development things we want to see happen in our county, and kind of prioritizing that so that we know what we want as a county. And before we do that, we need to go out into the community and be transparent about, here are the priorities we have, what do you think? And getting that input and moving together in that sense. But that's where my thoughts are. I don't know if that counts as a perspective, but that's my thoughts along these lines.
Thank you so much. Okay, I've been holding off the horses here, so let's get the horses moving. So we've had two different, I think, enactments that have been mentioned. We've had the National Environmental Policy Act. We've had the Congressional Review Act. I don't know if there are other enactments that folks want to talk about here, but rather than to start, maybe we can just highlight what those enactments would be, just so others will know. So we don't have like a continual, now I need to go and do the wilderness. Right? Let's get the ones on the table that we want a response to. Are there any other big enactments that we want to talk about here in this question? Okay, yep.
Where do you want to start? But there's issues with the Endangered Species Act too.
Okay, ESA?
Like, yeah,
You wanna talk
how
about
far
ESA?
do you want to go?
Yeah,
Not
well,
really,
that's what I'm trying to, Sally, what I'm trying to do is, I just feel like if we wait till the fourth person, I'll be like, okay, now I really, really want to talk about it. So I just want to make sure that there's some disclosure about the ones folks want to talk about before we hop in.
I do want to talk about the Lee bill for a second when we have a minute.
Okay, we'll do that one next. How about that? We'll talk about privatization and the Lee bill next, if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, who wants to hop in?
Well, this is one we probably both agree, or maybe I shouldn't speak for you, Secretary Jewell, but it's the ESA is not working as I think everybody had hoped it would. And one administration, it goes to that whiplash effect. One administration pushes it one way, another administration pushes it the other way. But what I'd like to focus on is the delisting petition part. We have a lot of species that we've been working on in the state of Utah for decades, and we've had great success with a lot of those species. And the one I'd probably highlight is the Utah prairie dog. For decades, we've been working on that species. The populations have more than rebounded. They're doing exceptionally well, and yet we know we're facing, 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 years on a delisting petition. And I know other people are frustrated with the listing petition, the listing side of that, and I think our focus, we'd like to see successes and be able to actually go out there and say, hey, the ESA was working. Look how many species we've been able to delist that we've been working on for decades. But the process to delist takes so long that that's something I'd like to see some adjustments to.
Anyone else want to hop in?
I'll just add briefly, the Utah prairie dog is an interesting case because sometimes there are these species that exist only in one state. The Utah prairie dog is one of those. And my question is, why is the federal government regulating something that is solely intrastate, only in the state of Utah? There are other species like this. The federal government has authority to regulate interstate commerce and conduct. So sometimes this is an issue with the ESA as to how far, what the exact scope of federal power over regulation of these species is.
I'm just going to say, last time I checked, the prairie dogs didn't know where the border was.
They do.
Unless they got one of those electronic fences and the radio collars that Heidi was talking about. It's really complicated, and I only brought it up because it's a big one. The reason that states don't like it is because it gives the federal government oversight on things that otherwise were states' responsibility if a species, which is a United States species, probably a Mexican species too, but we're just operating within the bounds of our Constitution sometimes. The Endangered Species Act has been incredibly important for protecting species that otherwise would be gone. And so I think we need one. I think it has been an important model that has been followed in other places. But I'll also say, as someone that had 3,500 active lawsuits v. Jewell during the time that I was secretary, 3 new ones a week, tying up all my wildlife biologists in lawsuits, that the bar to petition for listing was very low. And we tried to actually change this and make it harder during the time I was there, because there should at least be some science behind it, so all the burden of proof doesn't have to fall on the public land managers. But I would not want to do away with it. And I think one of the reasons that it persists and is frustrating on all sides is because people don't trust that if you open the door a crack that you wouldn't lose it entirely. So, and I'd say in many ways, NEPA has some of the same attributes, that there are things that are really critical around NEPA and SEPA in different states that are very, very important. And you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but there are ways of making it more efficient. And I think, bipartisan group to work on something like that would be helpful, because even when the Fish and Wildlife Service was staffed, I wouldn't say fully staffed when I was there, because it felt pretty lean back then, but now it's, many of these agencies are decimated. Tying them up on lawsuit, and not looking at how many species are there and what do we do about the habitat and what are the real problems, and is it endangered because of something that we can change or not, is where you really want it to be. So parts of it defy common sense, and that's what I found frustrating. But there's an opportunity to change it, maybe for our high school students up there. This is something you can help us fix in the next chapter.
Do you want to take any of these?
I don't want to take Endangered Species Act.
No. Oh, do you want to take either NEPA or Congressional Review?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot teed up here. I don't even know where to begin, except to say, if Redge, very happy to host you for a few minutes at the office. All the speculative leases, we have a long list, so maybe we can compare lists. My goodness, the Congressional Review Act, this is the most blunt possible instrument that Congress could use. 1996 Newt Gingrich era. It's like salting the earth. It's the nuclear option that people talk about, and it is in this 119th Congress, For the very first time, this Congress has wielded this very blunt instrument to undo 6 land management plans, resource management plans from the Bureau of Land Management. Miles City, North Dakota, Buffalo, Coastal Plain, Arctic, another one in the Arctic. And the Bureau of Land Management, who's charged by the Federal Land Policy Management Act, Congress, to manage public lands for multiple use and sustained yield, cannot put in a new plan substantially the same without an act of Congress. And the last time I checked, that takes a heck of a long time. And this idea that we're going to go around breaking the system of federal public lands through using this very blunt tool and saying there's going to be a lot of litigation, well, that's not very fast. That's not a very great way to manage our public lands, just through litigation, and tying up the Bureau of Land Management's hands so it's going to make it virtually impossible for them to manage that land. Well, that doesn't sound like a really super idea to me either. And then neither does the idea that the uncertainty. If there was somebody on our panel from the oil and gas industry, they would tell you that the one thing they want the most is certainty in how to manage federal public lands. They know how to play by the rules of the game when you lay them out. It's the same for ranchers, the same for guides and outfitters, for local towns, for members of the public. Certainty for how to operate on the public lands, that's what land management plans are for. And the Congressional Review Act and the use by this Republican majority to wield that tool to break the system of federal land management is a mistake. And they are trying it, and they're going to fail in this attack on the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, because we know that Americans love their national monuments. And this would be the first time that this is the first time Congress is trying to use this law to attack a national monument and a management plan for that 1.9 million acres that is the crown jewel of the system of our federal lands. And it is just a fundamental mistake to break the system that way. If you want to reform it, I thought Andy Mergen's idea yesterday that Sally just echoed of let's have a public land law commission, let's talk about it in a bipartisan fashion, let's chart that path forward so people have certainty, so there's this full vetting of ideas. Breaking it, saying we're going to have a lot of lawsuits, saying there's going to be a lot of bloodied fists, that's just not, for those of you who spend time out in the Grand Staircase Escalante, that is not how we want to see, I think, that magnificent landscape treated. That everybody's hands are going to get bloodied, that we're going to break this system, that people are not going to know how to behave out there until the litigation is over, which may or may not be in my lifetime. So that's my thoughts on it.
Anything more on these? No? Okay. We've had our, so Redge, I'm going to let me tell you the question the way I frame it, and then let me give you the top voted comment on our Slido, which is similar, but maybe a little bit more pointed. So the question that we have is, what about the potential alternatives to public lands that are frequently in the news? So we could think about them as state government, on one hand, making more of an issue. We could also think about privatization. And I know you wanted to talk about the privatization piece. The commenter basically is also asking you to comment on the privatization piece. And it says, I'll just read it. And I don't think you need to, some of this is not your lane for sure, because you've got another elected official involved here, not just the governor. But it says, Redge, in the past you've said the goal hasn't been to sell off public lands. How do you square that with the Utah AG's office literally saying in court that the goal is to dispose of lands? So anyway, you could take that, you could take it from that perspective. You could also take it from the perspective of what about the potential alternatives that are frequently in the news surrounding Utah public lands, increased role of state government and or privatization. We'll take that to the panel. I'll let you start if you want, Redge.
Thanks.
Great.
I knew I was going to get some pointed questions, so I love them. I want to start off, though, with the Lee map, or the Lee effort and map that came out. I'm a little dismayed that the truth about that map never came out. That map that everybody saw that was, we're selling off vast acreages in Utah actually came out from draft language. That wasn't the final language of that bill. We worked for another 8 days after that map came out on the bill language. And we never put out a map because we didn't want to put out a map that was not accurate to the bill language. And so we took the wilderness bill and we analyzed it, and it was 18 million acres is what they had in Utah. But that was on draft language. We worked with his office, on a bunch of changes, and the actual bill, when it came out, we created a map with my GIS team, and he is a phenomenal GIS person. But we went through the language with our attorneys, then we went to the GIS team. We had said, okay, this is what's in the actual language that was presented to Congress. 18 million, what came out in the Lee bill under the actual language was 60,000. Now, when I looked at the map that was from the bill, actual bill language, I said, well, that area doesn't work because it's super high slope, right? And I said, that area wouldn't work because there's endemic species. So when we got down to all the analysis, some of this was after the bill language. So bill language was 60,000. But when we did the additional analysis of what the state of Utah would even be interested in, it was about 6,000. 6,000 to 7,000 was what we were interested. So the bill of goods that was sold on draft language was Utah's up for selling 18 million acres. Absolutely false. We have no intentions of that. We had no intentions of selling lands that were encumbered with a grazing allotment or other prior existing rights. And I will say, has the state been interested in trying to find some lands that are available for housing in the state of Utah? Yes, we are. And we'll probably look at maybe other alternatives. But I was just in St. George the first part of this week at the Water Users Conference, and I went by a parcel that was identified in this mapping process, and it's 10 acres right by Southgate Golf Course. It's been completely stripped of any vegetation. The only thing that's being used for is dumping yard waste and cement. There's 10 acres there that we could use for housing. It's owned by the BLM, has no ecological value whatsoever. It's just a dumping ground for folks that don't want to go to the dump. So those are the kind of parcels that we're interested in, period. Not interested in your hiking trails. We're not interested in your wildlife areas. We're not interested in selling off Delicate Arch. I saw social media posts that we were selling Delicate Arch. Absolutely false. So I just needed to correct the record on that, and I'm more than happy to send you the maps and the language and how we came to that 60,000 acre determination. And I just want to let you know that we are not interested in using public lands as we think of public lands. Places where we hunt and fish and mountain bike and all that. That's not it. But there are numerous parcels across the state that are within city limits that have no ecological value. I shouldn't say no. There might be a lizard on one or a bird on another one, but it's very, very limited. And the highest and best use for those inside city limits that are islands within private property, yeah, we're interested in looking at those for housing. We are. So, the other one was how do we square? Wasn't really prepared for that one, and I don't want to speak for the AG's office, but I think the word they used was disposal. They were available for disposal, not for sale. But if I'm wrong on that, please correct me. And disposal has many means, right? Disposal doesn't mean that it's just sale. There's many options under disposal of what that could mean. So, but I think if you heard the state of Utah in the campaign that we ran, we want to keep public lands in public hands. We are not interested in selling off the public lands. Do we want to have more input in the management of these public lands? Absolutely. With traditional ecological knowledge that the state brings, with the indigenous knowledge that Jamie's family brings, we think the local people have value in articulating management practices on the landscape, and that's where we are with that.
Okay. Any others want to comment on this bit?
Just briefly, American Enterprise Institute did a very useful study on the actual feasibility of using small amounts, very small amounts of public land for housing. And they found that if we sold BLM land, that's not protected wilderness areas or anything like that, near metropolitan areas in 4 states, Arizona, California, Nevada, and Utah, and we sold about 150 square miles, we could build 1 million units of housing. Now that's 1/3 toward fixing the housing shortage in the West, which study shows about 2.8 million. We need housing. I think everybody agrees we need cheaper housing. And this would actually have a very small, it's much smaller than many public land sales that have been going on since the founding of our nation. It would make a difference. And I also want to add, like, this is obviously a very contentious issue between, say, conservation and housing. We want both. So guess who should be making that policy trade-off? Congress, not the land agencies.
Can I just jump in and say that Congress should take action, and Congress did take action in the case of, don't ask me to tell you what the acronym means, it's SNPLMA. So SNI is Southern Nevada.
Public Lands Management. Right.
Public Lands Management Act, thank you. SNPLMA, which was pushed, I think, probably by Senator Reed long ago, but 87%, as was mentioned in one of the earlier talks, of Nevada is public lands, including right up to Las Vegas. And so, you know, they made a deal that said, we want to buy public lands, and the money that we pay the federal government for those public lands to be able to expand the boundary of Las Vegas has to go into improvements on public lands within the state of Nevada, maybe even within that general region. I think it might be regional, because you got some pretty fine facilities down there. But point is, you know, if there's logic and Congress thinks that that makes sense, Congress can pass a law and then the agencies can do it. But I think that wasn't sort of how it was done. And therefore you got the backlash. And, you know, of course, there's all kinds of misinformation, and people are sharing their views. I doubt that Mike Lee went about thinking that this is 6,700, 6 to, you know, 7, what was it, acres, or even 60,000 acres. I think he was thinking bigger, most likely, but maybe not. At any rate, Congress can and should act, and I wish that Congress would act. It hasn't been their forte in the last year, just saying.
Yeah, so just a couple fact points. We'll try to keep this moving along. I mean, first of all, if you look at the Utah Housing Strategic Plan from 2025, this is a document the state of Utah put out that identifies affordability as an issue that we're all facing. There's not a mention of federal public land as the nexus. That's not the shortage. That's not the problem. And so it's a canard to talk about that we just need to sell off these federal lands for affordable housing. The Lee language had no tie to affordable housing. So there was nothing that would require the land that Lee wanted to see sold moved into or used for affordable housing. And I think people know Mike Lee is very proud of who he is and what he stands for. And that is not the system of federal public lands in this nation. He fundamentally doesn't agree with that concept of federal public land ownership. And so I think people were deeply skeptical when he came out with something and then was trying to walk it back and say he wasn't trying to sell it off, because of course he was. And the state of Utah sort of defending this idea, I think we all know that in the last year when the state ran this media campaign for the better part of a year to the tune of millions of dollars to force the disposal, we could sit and argue about what disposal means. Sale. It means the sale of public lands. I mean, let's be real here. That's what we're talking about. That was the goal of that lawsuit that the state of Utah tried to file that we heard about yesterday in front of the United States Supreme Court, was to force the disposal, sale of more than 18 million acres of federal public land in this state. And to sink this in with Grand Staircase for a moment, when the governor and others talked about what are these lands for, they were saying they were the sort of scrubby lands in the desert, you'll hardly miss them. And they were not talking about selling monuments. At the same time, the state of Utah is working to undo the Grand Staircase and Bears Ears National Monuments. And once undone, not through the CRA because that doesn't affect the monument designation, but by a new order from Trump, then those lands are fair game for sell-off. So that's really like the full circle, the fuller picture, I think, of what we're talking about. And there's a process under the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, FLTMA, for identifying lands for disposal. And Redge and I know about this. We look at the same maps. We have the same shape files from the BLM that identify tracts of land throughout the state that the BLM has already said are appropriate for consideration for disposal. If we're serious about this, let's start there. And those lands inside the city that Redge talked about, those are not federal lands anymore because school trust lands has gone around and picked those off. That those are already owned by school trust lands. They've already acquired those through exchanges. So these small federal parcels these small parcels inside of cities are rarely going to be owned by BLM.
So Steve and I could probably go back and forth all day long on this stuff, but we won't. But there's a lot of speculation in what Steve just said, and I'll just leave it at that. But happy to talk to it. Maybe the two of us can be out here and you can come and pester us with questions later.
Well, that would be good because one of the comments wanted you to duke it out over RS2%. So that's great. Well, we can do that. But let's end here. I want you to think about the question Lincoln had been asking, what gives you hope? I want you to think about the title, Way Forward. I want you to think about Ryan Gellert's suggestion that you get off your butt and start doing something. What is it that people, as they walk out of here, what do you want them to do? What should people be resolved to do as they walk out? Last question, who wants to go first?
All right, you want to go? Go ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
Guess I get to go first.
Okay.
Speak to the opposition with an open mind. Please. Public lands do belong to everybody. You're right. The rancher's right. The oil and gas folks are right. I've got family that still work the coal mines down in Salina. They love public lands just as much as anybody in this room. They love to hunt. They love to fish. We all love our public lands. And talk to other people with an open mind. That's number one. A couple of things that I'm super excited about are the technologies coming out that are going to help us manage public lands. Heidi Red unfortunately stole my thunder on this one, but the fencing, the electronic fencing that we're starting to do on public lands, I do think that is in line with the shift that we saw after the Taylor Grazing Act. What we're able to do with grazing now is absolutely amazing. We can set it like if you're on a stream that traditionally has been open, where your cattle are going down to water, like you can narrow that down to an area like 10 yards wide where they can water, and they will, and you can let the other area rest, and then next year you can go to a different area and let the other area rest. It's phenomenal stuff that's coming up. LIDAR is incredible, and looking at forests and forest health and things like that. A lot of times we get so focused on what the problems are, including me, I do the same thing, that we kind of forget that there's always solutions coming up. So keep that open mind. Be open to the solutions. Be open to implementing those solutions. Some of them won't work. Some of them might fail. But that's the way the world works, right? Not everything's a success. Not everything we try is a success. Trial and error, but that's how we get there. That's good science, is trial and error, making those things work. So talk to the other side and be hopeful, because there are good solutions coming out, and Steve and I will meet you out back. We're gonna have a duke out later.
Ethan, why don't you take it next?
Sure. We're always tempted when we are working through the political process to, if things don't happen in Congress, to pass it on to the president through executive order or to various bureaucratic agencies by letting Congress pass off these decision-making to them. But I think we have to remember that the executive power, it's the one ring, right? In Lord of the Rings, the ring of power that everybody wants. They don't want it because they're corrupt and evil. They want it because they want to do good. They see all the good they can do with it. But guess what? The one lesson from the Lord of the Rings is you don't get to keep the ring. The ring passes on to somebody else. And that's what we've been dealing with this regulatory ping pong every 4 years. The ring passes on to somebody else. It's always going to get in the hands of whoever Sauron is. Maybe Sauron's President Trump. Maybe it's whoever you fear is going to be in the office next. But we love to say, since Congress can't do anything, let's have the federal agencies, the executive power, handle it. That's a very dangerous road, and I think we've seen that with the regulatory whiplash of every 4 to 8 years, and unfortunately, I think we are not learning the lesson that teaches us.
Sally?
Wow, I didn't think I'd hear Sauron. Where's Gollum? I want to, I guess, I want to certainly echo the comment that Redge made about talking to the opposition. Find yourself in conversation with people that think differently than you. Find yourself in communities that are different than you. Lived experiences are different. They're different geographically, they're different ethnically, they're different religiously. And I think that's important for all of us, because when you get to know human beings as fellow human beings, especially if you break bread together, you will find you've got much more in common than you have differences. And I'm sure that's true of the panel that's up here today. I want to just say a word to the young people in the room. The high school students, thank you, teacher, for bringing them here, and for the undergrads and the law students and other students here. I think that as you think about your journey, and maybe you worry about some of the things you're hearing or you despair over some of this, you know, as I said a little earlier, and Ryan certainly said in his comments, it's up to us who've been around for a while to stay in the game and bring our knowledge and share our knowledge to the extent it's useful, but also to listen and learn from you as digital natives, which we are not, many of us. And I would say to think about what are you good at and how do you want to engage. Like, I'm not a citizen activist. I mean, you know, I've gone to a women's march, I've gone to an occasional thing, but up in front of a podium making a point is not my forte when it comes to a high conflict environment. It makes me really anxious. So, you know, what am I good at? You know, I'm good at sitting around a table and kind of listening to different points of view and synthesizing something that I think people can agree on. You have to understand yourself and what you are good at and what really makes you excited, what makes you passionate. And I would suggest that in this ecosystem of the multiple facets where we can enter in this democracy that we live in, find one that fits with you and your skill set and the kind of call to action that I think we all have in terms of taking care of this place and the people within it for future generations will come to you more naturally when you align it with kind of who you are. Thanks.
Again, I am very appreciative of the chance to be up here. I think piggybacking on what you heard from Sally and from Redge, the Stegner Center does such a great job of this. As I was walking up the stairs yesterday, this idea of like having so many different sides of, or so many different aspects of the issues. I was walking by, you know, the state AG's office, sort of crowd was on one side. The solicitor's office has their, has their little seating area. The firm attorneys are over here, and people are all in the same room. We're sitting next to each other. We're talking to each other. I don't know if it's unique to Utah, but it is. It's something nice to find here at the Stegner Center. So thank you. I think it's to stay engaged. You've heard this from lots of people. I said it a minute ago. I am an optimist. I think that we're going to see through this moment. But it's to stay engaged and make your voice heard. I think there's so many pressures being brought to bear that make you very intentionally think your voices don't matter, and they do, and they matter every day. And to the speak truth to power idea, but also just staying with it. You're not always going to be listened to the first or second or third time, but to persistence is the key here. So, thanks.
Commissioner?
I think that you have to have those hard conversations first and foremost. And the uncomfortable ones are probably the hardest ones, but they're also the most important ones. And when you bring Native voices and perspectives to the table, that's a huge piece in being inclusive. And you know, a lot of the misinformation kind of gets settled when you start talking about things. As hard as it is, the truth eventually comes out. And you know, I think the more we do that, I think as Governor Cox says, we have to learn how to disagree better. That's the truth, I think. And overcoming those big things. I think I'll leave my comments at that, and just saying that can be hard too. But you know, I value the partnerships. I was really honored with what Sally was saying, where she came down during Bears Ears, visited with people, not just one group, but different areas in our community. And that's huge. And that's what we all need to do, is go out and meet people and talk about these hard conversations to help each other understand better. Redge has been awesome and being part of our conversation and being forward with things. So that's the hope that I have. That's the hope that I have. And the more we can engage in a healthy manner, the commonalities come out, and that's what I hope for, you know. I'll leave my comments at that. Thanks.
All right. All right. Okay, I just have a few quick remarks, but let me give some announcements. First, thanks again for joining us for the Stegner Center's 31st Annual Symposium, American Lands at a Crossroads, American Public Lands at a Crossroads. Please thank, one more time, thank these presenters and all the presenters that we've heard from. It's been a fantastic couple of days. We want to make a special thanks to our donors whose financial support makes this symposium possible: the R. Harold Burton Foundation, the Cultural Vision Fund, R Plus Energies, the Nature Conservancy, Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, the National Parks Conservation Association, the Wilderness Society, and Groundshift. We would appreciate if you took a few minutes at some point. You can find the online evaluation for the symposium. Your feedback is much appreciated. We spend a lot of time thinking about how we can improve this each year, and it's helpful to us and for our donors. If you are an attorney and you're looking for CLE, please remember to sign up for CLE. No signing up, no CLE. That's the rules. So details are on the website. You can also find a little bit, you could probably find a sign-up sheet still in the hall. Thanks to our online viewers. I don't know what our final count was, but I think there's a couple hundred of you online. If you stuck it out and you're still with us, God bless you and thank you. The last thing I would like to say is please plan to join us next year for the 32nd Annual Symposium on March 18-19, which will focus on nuclear energy and nuclear policy in the U.S. and how it will play out in our home state of Utah. Now, just a word. I just feel so strongly about this place. I love Utah, and I'm just so grateful that for anybody here who's concerned with how to make this place and protect it. You know, we heard from Ryan Gellert earlier, a couple of times he referenced the quote, "the best idea we've ever had." That's actually a Wallace Stegner quote referring to national parks, the best idea we've ever had. Here, there's a little bit more that he adds to it. It's absolutely American. It's absolutely democratic. They reflect us at our best rather than our worst. When you're out hiking, when you're out camping, you're not just a camper, you're not just a hiker, you're a citizen. You have a responsibility, just as you do when you're out. It's the same thing as going to the polls. You've got an opportunity to show appreciation for what you have and to be a responsible citizen. We always end with a Stegner quote, and this one, if anything sums up what I've heard for this last little question, think about how frustrated you may have felt when you came in. And I remember talking to a few of you in the hall saying, "Oh boy, this is pretty dark. It's pretty dreary." There's been we're facing some steep headwinds. Here we go. Angry as one may be at what heedless men have done and still do to the noble habitat, one cannot be pessimistic about the West. This is the native home of hope. When we fully learn that cooperation, not rugged individualism, is the quality that most characterizes it and preserves it, then we will have achieved itself and outlived its origins. Then it has a chance to create a society to match its scenery. Go out, citizens. We'll see you next year.